here, and perhaps some of you might not be on this land, but it's the oh wow, I can't even talk this morning. The Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and I pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'm excited that we've got people here from kind of all around today. So welcome everyone. So my name's Lexi. I am an education officer at SECCA, and I'll be talking a little bit about what SECCA is and what it stands for and the services we provide for those of you who might not be familiar with us. But first, I'm just going to share my screen. So let's see how good I am at technology. I tell you what, I've done this so many times, but I still forget which button to press. Would be the one saying share.
Yes, the one
Yeah.
that says share.
I
have also turned on transcripts, but I'm aware that not everybody may be able to see them. So if anybody's having issue with transcripts on their end and you want to turn them on the top bar of the screen, you'll see 3 dots above the word more. So if you click on that, then you'll be able to see a drop-down menu that will have transcripts and you can put them on there.
Awesome.
That's all. I'll leave it over to you, Lexi.
Great. Can everyone see my screen okay? I mean, I can't see any of you, so I can see Lorna's face at the moment. So Lorna, you can just give me a thumbs up or whatever, or let me know if there are any problems. So welcome to Sexual Health, Supporting Young People with Disabilities. So I'll give you a little bit of an outline of the workshop today, if my screen will allow it. There we go. So today, within the hour, we're going to just introduce to you a bit about SECCA and then open up this massive topic of sexuality and disability, which is huge. And we could probably do a 7-hour workshop on it, but we're not going to do that today. So it might be a little bit of a kind of information and reflection dump for you, but hopefully you'll have time to ask some questions at the end if there's anything you need to know. So we'll talk a little bit about sexuality education, which is such an important aspect of, particularly with young people, and a lot of preventative measures for the future and giving them, anyone a great quality of life, but particularly those with disabilities, we need to think about how we're giving that education. So we'll do some tips for teaching, and then we'll talk about some attitudes and values, cover a little bit about sexuality rights, and at the end, if there's anything that you've brought today that you really wanted to get more information on, I can either answer it in here or we can give you some kind of referrals to how to get consults at SECCA for more complex issues that you might be facing. So a little bit about SECCA. So SECCA stands for Sexuality, Education, Counselling, Consultancy, Agency. And so I say SECCA, a lot of people say SECCA. We don't mind, we answer to either. We use it interchangeably, but that's what it stands for, and that's an overview of the services that we provide. So our service is a non-for-profit service that offers counselling, one-on-one counselling to people mostly with intellectual or cognitive disabilities, but not solely that. And it's all about sexuality and relationships. So it's a very specialised type of service, but we do know that disability is a huge, huge area, and also sexuality and relationships is a huge area. So we are dealing with all kinds of things under that umbrella. So it could be protective behaviours, healthy relationships, hygiene, friendships, social skills, self-esteem. So it really does go quite broad. So we do offer that one-on-one counselling to people who live with a disability, but we also provide education and consultancy to the broader community as well. So doing online webinars like this, but also we provide a lot of different workshops to the community as well. And we also offer a one-on-one or more focused consultancies for those who might need to bring a bit of a more kind of personal or complex issue to us, or need some assistance to support someone in their life who is living with a disability. So we really want to make sure that we're kind of offering that kind of holistic support to people. So I really encourage you to come and get in touch with us if you want, and check out our website and see how we can support you if you're out there in the community supporting anyone with a disability. Also, I just want to say, if anyone does have a question or wants to clarify something throughout this presentation, please because I can't see you, you can either interrupt me with your voice, or you can just let Lorna know in the chat and she'll interrupt me, and I'd love to answer anything that comes up.
We do have a question in the chat, Lexi. So does SECCA counselling only operate in Perth, or is it available by telehealth for people in regional areas?
That's a very good question. So we currently only operate in WA. So we offer our face-to-face one-on-one counselling in our office in WA, or we do also offer telehealth. I'm not really sure. I know because of telehealth and the way that it's expanding kind of counselling services and where we can do that from, I actually don't 100% know the answer to that question as far as the counselling service goes, because it's all linked to the NDIS, so it's kind of reliant on people's NDIS plans. We do have separate kind of gap funding from the Department of Health, but that is specific to WA. So people who for some reason can't access an NDIS plan or can't get us on their NDIS plan, we don't turn those people away. We still offer them a service, and we use that gap funding to do that, but that's specifically only people in WA. So if you want that question answered better, Maria, who works as our administrator, is an NDIS wizard and knows all the questions to those things, and she's on the other end of the phone. So highly recommend those questions going to her. As far as consultancy goes, we offer the consultancy as a free service for people in WA, but if you are outside of WA and you'd like to book a consult with us, it is fee for service. It's not hugely expensive, but it just doesn't cover like the funding that we're given to provide that service. So we absolutely can and do speak to people from all over the country about these things, but yeah, those consults do cost a small fee. I don't know exactly what that is.
I think the question may have been specifically around, do people have to go into the Perth office, or can they, if they're in other parts of WA, can they access it?
Oh, no, sorry. Absolutely. Yeah. So all of WA can access it with telehealth. Yeah. So you can access it from remotely. But telehealth it's not new, but it is new. For our service, it's a little bit more new. We do recommend in-person counselling if possible, because of the way that we work in counselling. It's very psychoeducation based, and we use a lot of physical resources, videos, pictures, games, those kinds of things. We have started offering a lot more telehealth in counselling now, so it is possible, but it might not be suitable for everybody who's accessing us. So we really need to make sure that we are getting a lot of information in those referrals to know if we can actually provide that service over telehealth. Yeah, so please do contact us about that.
And I think SHQ in some of the regional towns also has their PIP program, which is similar.
Yeah, there are definitely other organisations around that are providing similar or other services in this area, so it's worth looking at. So this screen's been up for a while of this huge question: what is sexuality? And it's a hypothetical question, but I'd also love to hear if anyone's willing to kind of give it a definition for me. What is sexuality? If you had to describe that to someone who didn't know what that word meant, what kind of language might you use? There's a tumbleweed in the room. It's not an easy question to answer. I'll just keep talking, and if someone does want to pop up, feel free to. Look, it's a complex beast, sexuality, and it's not something that we can kind of put into one category. A lot of people might think about it only as the behavior that's happening when people are kind of getting sexually active, or more perhaps about their preference of who they might want to be dating or what gender they're attracted to, those kinds of things. But we think of sexuality as a very integral part of someone's complete identity. So it's a lifelong experience, and it's a changeable thing that just happens from birth. We have a sexuality when we're born in some kind of way, and over our lifespan that changes. So that can include all kinds of things, and we've got a nice little kind of word blob here with a whole bunch of different words that could be under this big umbrella of sexuality. Have a look at it. If there's anything on there that you feel you don't quite know what that is, or maybe wondering why it's on there, feel free to speak up and get clarity around that. Or if there's anything that kind of stands out for you. So you can see that it's you know, quite a lot of elements at play there, and it's not all physical kind of sexual elements. There's a lot about, you know, relationships, about personal identity, about expression, about, you know, physical, biological parts of ourselves. It's about our values and our attitudes. It's about our lifespan, our growth, the way we view ourselves and others. It's societal. It's impacted by media and culture and religion, and you know, it's such a huge area. And so this is one thing that, you know, at SECCA we have to be able to try and educate people on, but also, like, it's a diverse beast. So then we add this question onto the mix: what is disability? I challenge someone to try to answer that for me. What is disability? Someone who's never heard that word before, what might we use? What kind of language might we use to describe it? So we often find people's answers to that are along the lines of, you know, either someone who has some sort of physical or mental impairment, or they then talk about different accessibility and the fact that there's lack of accessibility. And it's quite a hard thing to quite define into one definition, but this is how we've defined it here. So we say that disability is an umbrella term covering impairments, so problems in bodily function or structure, activity limitations, difficulties in executing a task or action, participation restrictions, so problems with involvement in life situations. And then we want to bring it out of just being a health problem. So disability is complex, and it's reflecting the interaction between features of a person's body and features of society that they live in. So overcoming the difficulties faced by people with disabilities requires interventions to remove environmental and social barriers. Because if you think about disability and then you bring that into kind of a societal or cultural context, you can really see how that can change in a lot of different areas. So for example, you know, living here in Perth in 2022, if you're someone who wears glasses, for example, that's something that's not really going to be impairing you because you have access to those glasses and opticals. But if then you were to maybe travel to a developing country that didn't have access to that, and you know, had quite high like vision needs, you might be considered as having a disability in that context because you don't have access to that one thing that's allowing you to drive and read and do things that we take for granted as kind of completely able-bodied people. So you do really have to think about it in those different contexts as well. So this is where we merge these two concepts, and that middle ground there, when we merge it, here be dragons. So this is where all of the kind of stigma and misunderstanding and confusion and taboos kind of arise in the fact that both sexuality and disability are complex areas, and ones that do have a lot of kind of different attitudes and values attached to them. So you know, if you're in this if you're a sexual health worker, which I'm sure a lot of you are, I'm sure that you've all experienced maybe uncomfortable reactions within your work. So from kind of a societal level, because we as a society are generally not comfortable talking about sexuality in a broader sense. And there's a lot of euphemisms that can be involved in sexuality speak. There's a lot of awkwardness. People can, you know, make a lot of comedy out of it. So it's generally not a comfortable topic. But then disability also has taboo as well. So many people who work in disability experience similarly awkward reactions to their work. You know, people with disability always encounter this day to day, and people can get quite weird around disability as well. So others might not really be familiar with disability. They might worry if they'll do or say something wrong, kind of walk on eggshells or get overly self-conscious, make a lot of judgments and assumptions and things like that. So when we interact and intersect these two areas, it can make people particularly uncomfortable. So it can be quite a scary and uncharted territory for people, and it just becomes like too hard basket. And there's a lot of myths and misinformation that gets spread as a result. So I wonder if people in this room today have actually experienced that in their profession and can reflect on times where they might have, you know, themselves had to deal with conversations around this, and how you've actually handled those conversations and how you felt inside having to deal with these difficult conversations. So there's a little bit about the research. So the research says that people with disabilities are underscreened for sexual health related testing, less likely to receive comprehensive sexuality and relationships education, more likely to experience sexual trauma. So 90% of women with an intellectual disability have been sexually abused or assaulted. And families, friends, caregivers, healthcare professionals, and government policy can sometimes be barriers to accessing adequate sexuality education or information. So that's all, quite well documented in the data. But we know that sexuality education particularly is so important and essential for protecting people who are vulnerable from abuse and assault, and also empowering them to have better quality of life, to make safe decisions, and to have ownership over their body and confidence and things like that. So why it's essential. So it avoids those negative sexual health outcomes. It gets rid of the social loneliness and isolation. It can really bring those statistics down with experiencing sexual abuse, and also people who are empowered and know how to talk about their body and know what's going on can actually also prevent perpetrators, because perpetrators will, hone in on those who they know are not likely to disclose abuse. So the education there is very important. And it also is helpful in preventing relationship violence. It promotes human rights, it heightens self-esteem and healthy behaviour, promotes good communication, healthier relationships, and full participation in society. So we're talking about, sexuality education there, and why it's really important and relevant. And, we do see a lot of myths around people with disabilities. So here are some of the myths that we often hear, and perhaps there are others that you could add to the list as well. So we hear that people with disabilities don't have sex, they can't have sex, they shouldn't have sex, or are oversexed, deviant, or out of control. They're only heterosexual or cisgender. They can't be parents. They can't form or maintain relationships, and they lack the capacity to understand sexuality education. So these are some common myths that we hear, and they are, all untrue. So, many of the issues faced by LGBTI people with disabilities are an extension of the issues with all people with disabilities face when it comes to their sexuality. So there are a lot of kind of myths and assumptions that cross over in those two realms. The top one there, they don't have sex because people think they don't desire it, or kind of assume that people with disabilities are asexual, or they can be quite infantilized, so in society, so seen as eternal children regardless of their chronological age or physical development. So it's not really about them not having sex, it's more to do with other people kind of not desiring that sex. People assume that people are not physically capable, or that they can't consent to sex. And then there's this kind of stigma that it's wrong or immoral, and that, people shouldn't be allowed to have sex. And there's a lot of gatekeeping that can happen with families or with support staff that really kind of impact the social interactions that people living with a disability can access. people with cognitive disabilities are often seen to have no inhibitions or no boundaries around sexuality, and it can be seen as a danger to others. But it kind of generally will lead back to a lack of education around things like public and private, or safe and unsafe touch. And so it's often just put on them as more of a deviant behaviour rather than lack of that education. And it's just quite common for people to think that people with disabilities will be unable to raise children, or that giving them sex education might confuse or frighten them. And so it just becomes kind of too hard for people to deal with. I've got a little bit of a video to show you. So I probably won't play the whole thing. We won't have time, but I might play you the first kind of couple of minutes of it. It's quite a nice video of some people's lived experiences and just reflecting on sexuality. So if there's anything while I'm playing this little video, if there's anything that comes up that you want to have a question about, just about the last part that I shared, please put it in the chat. But yeah, I won't play this whole thing, and please let me know if you can hear and see it. Can we hear and see it, Lorna? Can we do a thumbs up? Yes?
No, I can't see it.
Okay, so it's not working. So I'm not gonna actually play it, because that's going to be a tech issue that I
You have a link to it?
No, we don't have it embedded, but I can see if I can get a link to access it for you, or put it in a Dropbox and send it out.
Sure.
We'll have a look at the licensing laws for that one before I commit. But yeah, sorry to not be able to play that. Just gives us more time for questions at the end. So there are a lot of questions around, the sexuality education that kind of is offered in schools particularly, but also, in the community. And I'm assuming that, most of us in this room probably didn't get a very comprehensive sexuality education, at least in high school. And, if any at all, it's not something that, historically we got a lot of. So we're faced with the kind of challenge of not only finding new ways to adapt the sexuality education that's out there for people with disabilities, but also but reflect on our own comfortability, attitudes, values, and what we know, and educate ourselves to actually help to be those educators, because it's not kind of something that everyone has this baseline of experience with. But we'll give you some kind of an overview of the tips that we generally give to people who are in positions where they will be doing sexuality education with people with disabilities. And this doesn't necessarily have to be a very kind of formatted lesson plan type of classroom situation. It can be, but there are also a lot of other moments where sexuality education can happen in any kind of professional or personal interactions. And sometimes those interactions are the most kind of memorable and impactful. So we recommend that, when working with people with intellectual disabilities, that your communication is very clear, and the language is very simple and slowed down, and trying to avoid jargon, acronyms, and elongated sentences. So, there's information that we can take for granted. So it actually can be quite complex for someone who's just learning these concepts for the first time. So we kind of need to scaffold the concepts. So taking it one aspect at a time and checking for understanding of that one aspect before then moving on and continuing and building upon that. Smaller group sizes is best practice for any sexuality education, but particularly for those with disability. So it's actually best practice to do one-on-one education, but I know that's not always possible. It's really important not to make assumptions about what someone does or doesn't know prior to having these educational moments. So it's good to test for their knowledge first. So going back to the basics, checking for what they understand, checking for what they've already learnt, and then building from there. Because we do have stories, you know, of clients that have come in to SECCA, for example, for counselling, and they've said, oh, you know, I've got a girlfriend and I'm really excited to start having sex with her. And the counsellor's gone and gotten out all the condoms and contraceptives and the big dong that they put on the desk and gotten ready to do this condom education. And then, you know, just before kind of launching into that, they decided to take a step back and actually ask that person, oh, you know, what does sex mean to you? What does that involve? And the person actually just thought it was holding hands and going to the movies. So, you know, if we were to kind of give them that kind of dive straight into the condom education and stuff, it probably would have been quite confusing for that person who just thought having sex was holding hands with their partner. So it's really, really important to check. Visual aids are really, really helpful for a lot of people, including people with low literacy and also people who don't have English as a first language. We use a lot of kind of picture cards, social stories, and video footage and things like that at SECCA to assist in those educational teachings. So concrete examples is really important. And so that means that like any imagery that you're using or language that you're using, trying to avoid kind of going into metaphorical territory with that. It's really common for people, you know, particularly people with on the autism spectrum, sorry, to take things very literally. So if we start saying, you know, the birds and the bees, or putting a condom on a banana, there's some room for misinterpretation in that. So the SECCA app is a really, really helpful tool for those people who might need some concrete imagery to use in their education. We have thousands and thousands of tiles, illustrated tiles like the one on the screen here, that all show completely biologically and you know, correct sexual behaviors, body parts, things like that, so that we're really giving that very concrete information. And then some people also might have memory impairments, so repetition is really important, and checking retention from one session to another, and also making sure that things that we're kind of teaching people are being translated into other scenarios. So what they might remember sitting in a counselling room, for example, or having a conversation, might not then be playing out in their behaviour. So just constantly checking for that understanding is really important. So giving accurate information. So like I said before, sexuality education wasn't compulsory in our own schooling. So it's also really less openly spoken about at home and within the community and families, depending on kind of what background you're from. Some people feel quite uncomfortable with their level of knowledge. So it can be hard to kind of answer questions or know that you're giving the correct information. So there is a temptation sometimes to kind of wing it or fudge the answer, or just kind of avoid the conversation or handball it off to something else or someone else. So we recommend that, you know, if you're unsure about something, that if someone asks you a question that you're unsure of the answer for, just be clear, just be open about that. Say, well, I'm not sure, like maybe we can look it up together, or maybe we can find that out together, or maybe I can go and find out some more for you and we can talk about that next time, and actually allowing that educational moment for yourself as well. And also, even though it can be sometimes, you know, an easier route, maybe avoid giving those stalk answers even to really young children, because we do know that young people with disabilities can sometimes be handle change difficultly. That's not even a word, but you know, struggle with changes over time. And so if we're teaching one thing when they're younger and then kind of changing it when they get older, it can start to really muddy those waters of understanding. So finding out what the person knows. So, you know, if we've been in a situation where someone's come and asked a question about sexuality, you know, maybe what does this word mean, or what does this act involve? It's great to kind of explore that, open that up to then find out what the person already knows. So it can give you time to collect your thoughts and figure out kind of how you're going to answer next, but also it's really good practice in avoiding making those assumptions about what the person knows or doesn't know. So then you're not going to be telling them something that they don't understand or that they already understand. You're not going to assume knowledge that they don't have, and checking that you have the same use of language for things as well. So you can check for those gaps or misunderstandings, gives you a better idea of exactly what they're asking, and sometimes tells you why they're asking as well. So, you know, there could be a completely different reason to why they're asking something to what you've assumed. Lets you know how much detail they need, and then it might uncover important issues as well. So it becomes more of a conversation and a collaborative moment than just you giving them an answer that you think they need. And it can just put it into more context. So, you know, if someone came up and said to me, you know, what's this line in the song WAP mean? Which I would love to know. I'd be like, oh, what have you heard about that? You know, have you heard that word before? Where have you heard that before? What do you think it means? Just kind of doing those probing questions to kind of find out a little bit more about what's behind that question. So giving information in ways that people can understand, and this can be really challenging. So, you know, people have a lot of variety of learning needs and capacity for, you know, what they can comprehend. So not one strategy is ever going to work for everybody. So it's an explorative process. So being prepared to adapt or interpret information in a lot of different ways, and also providing visual support is really, really good thing to have up your sleeve. So it helps people to understand and how to apply information, and it can also, you know, you can help them to understand how to apply information. And that was kind of like saying before, when, you know, we learn it in one context, but then we also need to translate that into another context. Using concrete examples, but also finding things that are personal to that person. So, you know, if they have a very, very special interest in, you know, a game or a TV show or a YouTube video or whatever, trying to find things to link to that so that they're actually, you know, getting more of an understanding, more of an engagement in the topic, and helping them to understand the social context and why the information is important. So it's not just about giving information, but it's also understanding, you know, different kind of repercussions of certain behaviours, or how people are going to respond to you if you start talking about this in a public place versus a private place, or why certain things are acceptable and certain things aren't, and kind of bringing it into that cultural context as well. So there's a lot of discussion that is needed within these kind of educational settings. And my favourite one, teach seizable moments. So education shouldn't just be confined to formal settings. So everyday interactions provide many opportunities to discuss relationships, appropriate behaviour, etc. So you can build it into those everyday routines. And the media is a really great source of what not to do, conversations, but also what to do. But, you know, like if you see an advertisement that's showing a lot of cleave, or I don't know, a TV show with a really toxic relationship in it, you could open up a conversation. Oh, what would you do in that situation? Oh, would you wear that at the beach, or would you wear that at school? Or, you know, things that you can actually do in that moment and just seize that conversation. So it's a really great way to reinforce messages in a way that's really concrete and really immediate, and it can often be more engaging and less pressure on that person when you've just brought it up as a, you know, a moment by moment thing, instead of actually sitting down and doing sexuality education lessons and having someone potentially just switch off. Yeah, so it really kind of models. You're using what's in front of you to model moments for this person. I know I'm just speaking and speaking. I just wanted to quickly just pause and ask if there was any comments or questions so far, or anything that you needed some clarification on. because I can't see anybody's faces, so I'm just sitting alone in a room talking to a PowerPoint presentation. Yes, feel free to pop a question at any time.
So far, there's nothing in the chat, but I'm happy to monitor it. But it did sound like there's a question coming.
Okay, great. So well, it sounded like there was someone wanting to speak, did you say?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yep. Nope. All right. Feel free to interject and just butt in if you want to. I'm completely open to that.
2 comments. So we have Kerry that says, "This is great. You're doing very well."
Thank you.
Caitlin Archer, advice for echolalia. Caitlin, can you expand a bit more on what you mean by what advice you want for echolalia? And just for everybody else in the room, echolalia is when somebody repeats words, phrases, or songs, anything that's repetitive.
Okay. So I guess hopefully you can pop a little bit more about that question. Feel free to just pop it in the chat. And I might come back to that as well, just so I can have a little bit of more of a think about it as well. But we'll definitely have some time at the end for me to address some of those questions. So
so Caitlin's just said more around managing a client's phrases in public settings.
Yeah. So someone's saying a lot of things and repeating a lot of things in public that might not be suitable for, saying in public and things like that. Is that kind of what you mean? And it might not necessarily be something that they're meaning to say, but something they're just kind of
Caitlin
repeating.
says yes.
Okay. Yeah, and that is something that we do come across quite a lot. It's not an easy one. I think, depending on people's capacity to really understand these concepts, particularly of public and private, that's one of the more complex beasts that we do try to teach here. And it's probably one of the most important concepts to teach for protective behaviours as well, and also just in general. It's also one of the main reasons that we find problematic behaviours happening because people have missed out on really learning about public and private. Because we know that even though it's quite a binary thing that we might take for granted, there are so many grey areas in public and private that need to be addressed. So, not only do we have to break it down into public and private body parts, behaviour, talk and places. So we have kind of a scaffold of the way that we would teach that. We then, once we go into each one of those, there are so many other things about like, oh, look, a toilet is private and not public, but then let's add like a public toilet, that's a private place within a public place. So there just becomes these really nuanced kind of grey areas in that. And for people who aren't at a high level of really understanding those nuances, something like public and private is really difficult to teach. And so, we want to be very repetitive and be giving modeling behaviors and teaching those protective behaviors of maybe not yelling certain things in a private or public forum, but it's not always possible. So often we say, if a behavior is happening in the moment that's not appropriate, we don't want to dismiss or ignore that behavior because that's not teaching the appropriate behavior, and to try and redirect in that moment where possible to a safer behavior. But as far as teaching those lessons and getting that to be really understood by that individual, it might take a lot of repetition, a lot of different creative tactics, and at the end of the day, it doesn't always work. So all we can do is try our best and try to kind of be, engaging that person into more safe behaviours when it comes to public and private and the things that they're saying. But we know that it's not always going to work. So yeah, I'm sorry I can't give you a more kind of concrete and
I'm happy to say a bit about echolalia if you have time, Lexi.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm autistic and my son is autistic and everybody in my family is autistic. So my and this is only speaking from what I've noticed within my family. So I know that my echolalia comes out in public more as a stim. So stimming behavior is something that people that are neurodiverse do to regulate. And I guess coming with a theatre background, echolalia is something that I just naturally do. And it was probably just seen as something when I was little. I was just like, oh, that's because she's a theatre kid. So often language that are curse words or are inappropriate actually have a lot of plosive sounds in them. So plosive being things like peas. So think about like how satisfying it is to say fuck when you've hurt yourself. Versus like, oh geez, it doesn't give your mouth the same input. So often what I try to do if I'm doing it is that first noticing that obviously I'm dysregulated and then doing my own calming strategies. So for me, that's breathing. For other people, it's going away. It might be running for somebody else. Everybody's strategies for that is completely different. Or it may be that also that I just need to find a similar sound to give myself that input. Or like Lexi was saying, being like, okay, if that's really what I need right now, and that's the only coping strategy I have to keep myself regulated, to take that to a private space. But yeah, that's just my input.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I've never really I don't know a lot about echolalia personally, so it's helpful to hear that just from a lived experience. Thanks, Lorna. I'll continue on. So using correct names and terms for body parts is hugely important. Particularly in protective behaviours. Sometimes families can be very uncomfortable teaching that correct language, and that's highly dependent on culture and background and, how kind of appropriate a family deems these words. So we want to acknowledge, we don't tell people not to use, pet names or kind of slang names for their body parts, but we also want to give the importance of what it is to teach the correct terms as well. So it's adding that on. So saying, look, fine, call it whatever you want in the home, but also teach the correct terminology. Knowing the correct words for your body parts avoids having shame around these particular body parts. It normalizes them. Everyone's got them in some way, shape, or form. It prevents people getting in trouble for using inappropriate language. So if they only know, curse words around, their genitals, and they need to disclose or they need to talk about it, they might be getting in trouble for that. It makes it a lot easier to communicate with medical professionals about, where pain is happening or where they might have some issues. And it's essential for protective behaviours. So knowing your body parts means that you can know what you're consenting to. So what places that you want to be touched and don't want to be touched. Particularly as well in reporting abuse, if the terminology, the correct terminology is not used when reporting abuse or dealing with the courts and law system, it can be extremely difficult for a perpetrator to be convicted, just because that language becomes really grey area, and they really do need to have that very, very clear indication of what's happened. So that's one of the main kind of things that we use to convince parents, I guess, to start to challenge themselves if they're not comfortable using this language and they're really kind of pushing back against it. We like to just explain to them, we respect that you have this culture in your family, or this might not be comfortable for you, but it is really, really important for protection of your child, and that's why we're asking that you do this. It's not about disrespecting the language that you want to use in your home. Try to use multi-sensory teaching methods. So there's a lot of fun stuff out there that you can experiment with. So, rather than just kind of providing, a worksheet or something like that, having verbal and concrete explanations, engaging in conversation. Written material is completely fine, but we also love to use pictures, books, magazines, card sorting activities, videos, practical demonstrations, and role play. If you need any kind of resources around this, we have a library at SECCA full of all of these type of resources that we can lend out to our members. And the more that you have to support you in this kind of information sharing is better, because people just the more that they can learn in a variety of different ways, the more we know that it's going to actually translate into their knowledge. And sometimes we need to bring it back to the concrete as well. So kind of dealing with very abstract concepts can sometimes be quite difficult. So, you know, using dolls or using photographs of someone's family, or, you know, things that they can actually really link to a concrete concept is always really helpful. And also modeling diversity. So it's quite common for, you know, people to start a sexuality education with someone with a disability and going down these very, very simplistic paths to start scaffolding this, but then also just completely forgetting that people with disabilities have just as much diversity in their gender and sexuality identities as anyone. So we need to stray away from not using only heterosexual or cisgendered examples, and also including different family structures and relationship types as well, not making assumptions about what type of families these people are in and what they've grown up with, and normalizing that it's acceptable to be different, and that it's accepted and celebrated, and that it's okay to be in different, have diversity within your family or your identity as well. So just trying to be aware of that, and be inclusive in your language, and leave that open as well. And practice social skills in different settings. So not assuming that a lesson learnt in one place is enough. Some people have difficulty generalizing from one situation to another. Teach that it is the rule for at school and at the movies and at the shops and at the swimming pool, and taking it into all those different settings. Practicing with different people as well as different places, and also it might be needed to give a reminder before entering new situations of, you know, how these different skills that you've learnt in this area will apply to this new situation. And also incorporating problem solving. So, you know, testing understanding and ability to apply knowledge is great to open up this, like, oh, how might you do this? Or, oh, my friend went and did this, how might they get out of that situation? So it gives more confidence that they can handle unexpected situations. And there's that kind of first and third person. So there's the what would you do if, but then also if you find that's a bit too confronting for someone, being like, oh, too much pressure on just me, it could be easier to kind of be like, oh, what do you think this person should have done in this situation? And that just takes a bit of the pressure off that individual that you're supporting. Teaching the right to refuse. So it is understandable that if it's your child or a young person that you're working with, that, you know, we teach children and young people to be compliant. That's what happens in schools and in a lot of society. But it's also really important to teach young people to be assertive and actually, you know, consenting to certain touch and behaviours and things. So checking that people have the means to refuse. So, you know, we have heard of some horror stories of people who use communication devices having the word no just taken off their communication device because it was just too hard for the people to, you know, deal with them saying no to things, and that's really a restrictive practice and not okay. It's really important that people learn to deal with peer pressure and be able to say no in situations that they're not comfortable with. And it's an essential part of protective behaviours. So we can't be teaching consent to people if they don't know how to refuse and they're only taught to be compliant. And we do know that a lot of people with intellectual disabilities are taught to be very, very compliant from a very young age. And so it can kind of then grow into their adult life as well. So really important.
Lexi?
Yes.
Is that resource that you had at the screenshot at the bottom of the screen available online, or or is that just an example?
Sorry, that one?
Yeah.
I think that we might have that. I'll just go write a quick note to say refusal skills. If we do have it in our Dropbox, I can send it out.
Great, thank you.
For you, yeah, because there are lots of things out there that you can access. Yeah.
Awesome. There was also another question. How do people in regional areas borrow from the SECCA library?
Ooh, that's a good question. You may have to give us a call and talk to Maria. Again, we always just pawn all these questions off on Maria. I don't think it's not impossible. I think there might have to be some postage involved, but you do have to be a member of our library to borrow things. So in order to set up membership, you would need to contact our office. So yeah, and just see how that works. Pretty sure we have been posting some things out in the past, so could be an option. Okay, so staying consistent as people age, check that the messages you're giving to someone will still be appropriate when that person is older. So for example, you know, it might be appropriate for a 3-year-old to run around the house naked, but then if they're now 27 and living in a group home, it's probably not going to be appropriate for them to run around naked at home. So it can be quite difficult to unlearn what they've learned and then learn something new. So just making sure that you're kind of giving those messages earlier, and so that it's kind of across the span and giving those, you know, very, very broad messages. And don't wait till there's a crisis. So prevention is best. Be proactive from an early age rather than reactive. People don't learn when they're in a crisis, and providing education only when something's gone wrong sends a negative message. So it kind of can seem like a punishment that you need this education now, or, you know, you should be ashamed of what happened, so now you need education. Education around sexuality should be happening from day dot, and the conversations and just building that kind of normalization of sexuality in conversation is what can really actually prevent those crises from happening in the future. So this is just a quick example of one great resource, one of the many great resources we have in the SECCA library, but we do have a lot of different resources that are, you know, disability specific, or you know, specific for educators or therapists, or, you know, a lot of different kind of ways that to work with people with disability, or just giving more context to culture or sexuality, identity or gender, things like that. So you can have a look at our website and see the full library kind of list if you go in there, but also just give us a call if you need something, and we can kind of find out for you what we've got. So there are lots of ways that we can, you know, be a part of this change that's needed around sexuality and disability awareness. So just keeping in mind that disability is not always visible, and just having an awareness that, you know, just because we can't see someone's disability or the struggles that they're living with doesn't mean that it's not there, and just being open to kind of, you know, being reflective on what kind of messages we are given and assumptions that we're making, so that if we find out that someone does have a disability, that we're not, you know, being completely shocked or not kind of, you know, acknowledging their experience. Having an awareness of sexuality and sexual health needs, and not assuming that everyone is heterosexual or cisgender. Keeping in mind different accessibility needs for people within your staff, but also your clients. So, you know, we're talking not just about clients here. This is kind of across the spectrum. And also these conversations can be quite confronting. So just, you know, how are we keeping this privacy going with these conversations? How are we making those conversations really safe, and also instilling those public and private messages as well? And being reflective about how your own values, beliefs and attitudes of not only yourself but other people is going to impact your work. We all have a set of values and attitudes, and that's okay, but just having an awareness of how that is actually influencing the way that you work with people, and what kind of information you're giving them is something to really reflect on in your own practice. Because sometimes, you know, we find that there might be areas that you're not comfortable with, and that's okay. But if you're not comfortable and you don't feel equipped talking about things that are quite important, it's great to go and find someone who is willing to have those conversations. Keeping up to date with laws surrounding things like consent, guardianship, you know, other things like that that we don't often know a lot about, but can really be impacting people who are living with a disability, and really impacting what they can access as far as, you know, their sexuality or their expression, or, you know, their money, just all of those kinds of things. And also just, you know, keeping up to date with what kind of resources are out there. So, you know, if someone needs assistance in a certain way, like, do you know where to get them visual aids? Do you know how to find that simple information, or someone at least that you can get those resources off? So there's some areas that you can just reflect on for yourself, and what you might like to do in order to kind of develop the way that you're practicing in whatever career or whatever role you're in. And of course, we're always here for consults. So I really, that's really, quick service. We don't have a wait list for our consults. Everyone at SECCA offers consults. So whether it be a counsellor, an educator, or one of our projects team, we have a really diverse kind of well of experience and kind of specialization here. So we can often find someone quite knowledgeable in the particular area that you're wanting some consult on, to kind of hook you up with and have that conversation. And we can do that in person, like I said before, or over Zoom, or on the phone. So it's quite a flexible service that we provide, and it's great for people who just need a bit more support, or just even some empowerment. Often we find that people are quite hesitant and scared about this area, but once we have a conversation with them, they realize, oh, I've actually got so much experience and so much I can offer to this situation, and you just need that support and empowerment to get there. So we've kind of jammed that in, and it's 10:57 on my clock. So we've got 3 minutes for like a quick 1 or 2 questions if there are any. And yeah, thanks for sitting through that info dump. But yeah, open up the floor just in case anyone has anything.
There is a question in the chat. So one person says, I've previously had a look on the SECCA app for my clients. I couldn't find anything on toilet or hygiene processes. Is there anything that you could recommend? Thank you.
Okay. Oops, sorry, let me just, I'm going to try and stop sharing my screen as well. So that's going to be a multitask that I do. Oops, sorry. So we are currently undergoing a huge, big revamp of the SECCA app. And so I don't think there is that there at the moment, but there might be soon. We also have quite a lot of resources in our library around hygiene and toileting. So we've got some books and probably some videos and DVDs as well. So yeah, if you're looking for specific things like that, I recommend giving us a call in the office to just find out what we've got, because we can literally just look in the library for you, like right then when you call. And yeah, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I know that we do have some. Stop sharing. Am I back on the screen now?
Yes.
Yes. Cool.
A comment from Rachel. I just want to say thank you for your information session. Ross, very helpful. Thank you. Wendy, thank you very much. Smiley face.
Great. Thanks so much. It's been great to be here, and yeah, I hope you've gotten something out of today. And yeah, happy to follow up with any kind of resources or emails, or answer any more questions if you've got them. And I'm also happy to send this PowerPoint to Lorna as well, and she can distribute it for you if you're interested in getting that. But yeah, other than that, thanks so much for having me.
I will ask everybody to complete the survey that we do as part of our grateful funding from the Department of Health, and also to help myself and Lexi improve on what we do in the future. So I've put that in the chat. So it's surveymonkey.com/r, the letter R, /yep SECCA 22. And I'll pop it in the chat as well. Thanks everybody for coming. The survey will take less than 5 minutes. It's just 1 page.
Thanks so much. All right, I'm going to actually sign off now, but Lorna, yeah, you can give me a call or whatever if you need to debrief. Is that cool? Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone.
Love, see you again.
See you later.